Wir starten gleich digital. Also wir haben eine ganz besondere Gast hier heute eingeladen. Ich freue mich wirklich sehr, Professor Dr. Payal Arora zu begrüßen. Sie ist so vielleicht in dem Bereich hier noch nicht so bekannt. Sie wird heute einen Vortrag auf Englisch zur Interaktion zwischen Digitalisierung und Migration. Sie ist so wichtig, dass Forbes nannte sie die richtige Person, um den Tech-Branche zu reformieren. Sie ist Professorin bei der Universität von Utrecht. Sie ist auch UNHCR-Beraterin zu KI und digitale Anthropologin. Und ich freue mich auf Ihre Expertise. Fragen können wir am Ende des Vortrags auch stellen, auch für die, die heute in den digitalen Raum sind. Die können auch ihre Fragen in den Chat stellen. Wir werden später Raum haben für die Antworten. Yeah, thank you very much. Really nice that you are here with us. Please.
Thank you so much, and lovely to be here. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I'm happy to be part of this conversation, and I hope we can continue it down the line. So we have a short period of time, so I really want to get started on basically starting with a key story. I've been working a lot with organizations, think tanks, particularly dealing with refugees and in recent, I think a few months ago, I had this really interesting incident where I was part of a group, just like here, right? Where there were a number of think tanks, NGOs, consultants, all in the business of doing good. And a senior official, very much part of the UN system, who's been dealing particularly with refugees, asked me something. She was really grappling with the idea. She's struggling with the idea that how can she connect? How can she feel it is morally acceptable for her to connect the unconnected, given the fact of what's going on right now? She talked about how the digital is very extractive, very toxic. Anything on social media is basically really exploiting people's lives, ruining their mental health. And so in good conscience, as an actor, how can she go out there and say, let me bring people who are in the marginalized context to this toxic space? So in short, she was rethinking the very fundamental right of being connected, right? Now, to me, this is a sign of how the times are today, where there's a deep pessimism bias towards all things digital. And there are two very powerful narratives going on that is cementing this kind of thinking, and two very dangerous but popular narratives. And I'd like to focus on that. The two being, one is data colonialism, and the other is about how social media is ruining your mental health. So, for example, let's start with data colonialism. I'm sure many of you have heard of that, or in different versions, right? But it's been fostered in books, it's been fostered in now media articles, in reports about the idea that aren't we basically victims of these big tech companies? Aren't we constantly being extracted? And now we have no longer any control over our bodies, ourselves, our data, and even we have no control over what happens to our democracy. So basically, the human is against the machine, and we are at the losing end, which is creating obviously a sort of not just despair, but a paralysis towards everything digital. And when you have a sort of negative perception and you see tech as the colonizers, then obviously the kind of questions you'll be bringing up is, how do I contain, how do I break tech down? How do I even remove it from my lives, right? So that is one conversation that's going on. Now, what's the problem with that conversation is because it often comes from a position of privilege, because majority of people who are platforming that message, ironically or interestingly, have massive number of followers online, are very much part of the social media fabric, are actually reaping the benefits of social media by getting their message out there. And so the sort of double standard and hypocrisy doesn't seem to come in the way of being compelling as a logic. And it can be very damaging because here's the thing that they are enjoying the status quo because majority of the world does not want the status quo, right? Because here's some hard statistics. 90% of young people live outside the West. Many of these people are, in refugee situations, they are in informal settlements, they are in precarious conditions and contexts, whether it's through war, it's through mass mobilization, and a variety of reasons for economic purposes. And so here is a situation where majority of the world doesn't want status quo. They have weak governments, they have insecurities, they don't have jobs in line for them, governments are failing them. In relation to that, the digital has so much more promise for them because it gives them a little sliver of hope. It gives them not just hope, it's not a psychological only, it's very tangible because the creator economy, for example, is being driven by youth in Brazil, in the Philippines, in India, where basically majority of young people live. And particularly in even informal settlements like refugee context. I worked for quite a substantive time with UNHCR, particularly with Venezuelan refugees in Brazil. And again, it was the same evidence that basically, rather than opting out of the so-called toxic space, they wanted in. They desperately wanted as much data plan, as much of access to mobile phones, so they can feel connected with their loved ones back home, so they can actually play with themselves and experiment with different kinds of messages to carve opportunities of livelihoods when they're confined in their context, to be able to be part of global trends and call themselves a global citizen. And this has been consistent with the trends that I've been recognizing over 2 decades of research in precarious conditions from India, Brazil, Namibia, and elsewhere. And I'm pretty sure this is actually resonating with many of you today. If anyone has gone into the field and actually engaged with young people, they are not also naive, but they're optimistic because they're rational optimists, because they see that these tools, in relation to their existing material conditions, give them a little more possibility for self-actualization, right? So the other dangerous narrative is the idea of which has been by the way promoted by Jonathan Haidt and has become a major bestseller, and the book is called The Anxious Generation, where he's basically promoting this notion that this new generation of young people all over the world are completely ruined because of social media. Their mental health is being devastated. In fact, they are at the losing end, and aren't we, the past generations, really fortunate to have been saved by the toxic nature of social media? So this kind of narrative, right, is actually fueling things which are like policies which are on the extreme side, like banning of TikTok in the United States. These sort of arguments are instrumental in creating hardcore policies to block, ban, break tech, right? Now, the reality though is that if you look at like one of those best case examples, like Frances Hagen, who is a whistleblower on Facebook's usage of the algorithms to, impact mental health. When she came out, because she used to work at Facebook, she said, well, they knew there was actually bad for mental health, and yet they went ahead with it. But in the comprehensive report, what it also said was indeed it did create depression, but twice the number of youth reported that it enabled solidarities. It allowed them groups that where they can express themselves a little more freer compared to their existing context. So twice the number of youth reported that, and that was in the official report, but it didn't make the headlines because it created nuance, and nuance doesn't sell, right? And so this is something that I would like to really communicate and double down on, is that we need to be able to understand that they can coexist. We do have absolutely, risks and harms when we go online, and we do have a responsibility in ensuring that we are protecting those who are vulnerable. However, we cannot destroy the very thing that actually could be enabling them, right? Because we need to ensure that it is safe and secure so they can, optimize these social media platforms to self-actualize. Because look, tangibly, let's look at it in terms of if you're a homosexual in majority of the parts of the world, we're talking about 90% of the world's countries either criminalize being homosexual or, and actually go to the extent of death sentences, whether it's in Uganda and in many parts of the Middle East. And so if you are a homosexual, you will probably feel a little safer, and you will feel a little more human by being able to connect with others in, digital spaces, because you can't do that in person. You can't actually, reach out to random people because there are no gay bars around in many of these places, right? So that's just one example. Or, for instance, women's status, right? So women have to come up with tactics of solidarities, often online, and they want to track each other so they can move safely through public spaces. Or, for example, protest movements. They are going online because it's extraordinarily dangerous to go in person on the ground, on the streets, whether it's in Iran, whether it's in Myanmar, and in many other, Hong Kong. So the online provides a legitimate way of collective voicing of concerns. So all this is to say that we have to understand a worldview beyond the liberal democracies that we live in, which is less than 5% of the world's countries, to understand why we need to ensure that we keep these public spaces, which are, by the way, intrinsically public spaces, healthy and vibrant, but not get rid of it, because it's essential to the self-actualization of many people, and young people particularly, in their process of self-actualization. Because look, I mean, if we see the digital spaces as public spaces, would we say that, oh, public spaces are so dangerous that, hey, women and girls, please stay at home and, it's the safest for you, right? Go into, close your doors, and nothing will happen to you, right? That's basically Afghanistan, which is basically a medieval times today, right? And in fact, that has been reified into a locked profile by Facebook and many other technology companies, where it says, oh, do you feel unsafe on the digital platform? Here is a locked profile, so you can lock yourself in and feel safe, which doesn't allow women and girls to capitalize and optimize on the attention economy and the virality that can enable them to reach out to different populations, to become the creator, to monetize their content, and to come up with new forms of livelihoods, right? So we have to be very careful as we move forward in looking at these spaces and looking at these spaces as toxic, because we're coming from a position of privilege. And I think that is potentially the key, most fundamental message, because connectivity is still a right, absolute right. And it is, I'm doubling down on it, because much of what we're doing and our social lives and our personal lives are being platformized in ways that are unprecedented. And we cannot create a digital divide of this kind out of some sort of paternalistic moral, righteousness. And with that, let me pause, because I think what would be really important is to have a conversation on these messages and see where you're at. So I hope this is a teaser enough to get you started. Thank you.
Wie Professor Arora gesagt hat, es gibt jetzt noch Gelegenheit für Fragen. Das heißt, ich habe ja ein Mikro, und wenn Sie eine Frage stellen wollen, dann melden Sie sich und dann kann ich Ihnen das Mikro geben. Gibt es erstmal jetzt schon direkt eine Frage oder einen Kommentar?
Ja, da ist eine
okay.
Frage.
Ja. Ja.
Yeah, thank you so much. Felicitas Hillman, Technical University Berlin. Thank you so much for your brilliant talk. I was wondering if that is really a solution for the women in Afghanistan to stay in a blurb, which gives them the illusion that something will change. So it's, I mean, aren't you producing more blurbs of people which are already in a precarious situation with that argument? So in the future, there must be some real contact with the environment, so to change things.
Thank you so much for your question. Sorry, shall I answer the question or are you collecting others?
Yeah, I think you can answer the question directly.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I think it's a very legitimate question. But, I think one thing we need to really keep in mind, and it's a very dark, unfortunate truth, is that the reality is what's happening in Afghanistan is that they literally have gone into medieval times. Women no longer can work. They no longer can go to school, girls and women, right? They no longer have access to the public space. They have to be completely confined in their burqas, which actually basically dehumanizes themselves. People can't see them. It's a one-way street, right? It hampers their senses. In fact, a recent article even revealed that going to the salon for, just a haircut has also been banned because the Taliban recognized that this could be a contentious place where they could potentially get political. So even that has been banned. So in relation to that, there's an interesting article where it said that they are losing so much of their, they're going into deep depression, they're losing so much of their hope, and getting online and connecting with others and getting even kind messages from the global public, from their families and friends who have immigrated or, as refugees and who managed to escape in time. And that keeps them going and it keeps them strong. So it's in relation. It's not about us offering something. It is there, and compared to the material lived realities, the digital allows them a little more humanity. I'm talking about a little more humanity. And unfortunately, this situation could stay on for generation upon generation because we don't, as a global community, seem to have the mobility to protest on the streets as we're doing with other kinds of causes today. It seems like gender, the situation of women in the global south doesn't seem to inspire mass protests, which I wish it would, because it is basically women are secondary citizens in most parts of the world and have extraordinarily dehumanizing situations and contexts. So this is to say, just like refugees, right? Where we would love to believe that they're just temporarily in these camps and they'll move on. But we know for a fact that oftentimes that is their home and they multiple generations live in what is considered, a temporary settlement. So unfortunately, we have to recognize that our realities are far more sticky in nature and that the digital can afford a little more breathing room. But yes, that is, to me, what is hopeful about the digital, that it versus the lived realities.
Thank you. We've got, I think, one more question here. Yeah, so.
Hello. Thanks for all your work, first of all. I'm sure we're going to profit from it as a society. My question is around the public space. When I was a child, I think my mother, parents, or they just brought me into the public place and they showed me, these are cars. The cars are the most dangerous thing that could happen, but they can also move you from A to B and stuff. They have many benefits, but this is the most dangerous thing they warned me about, I think. What's the most dangerous part in the new public places, and what should we tell our kids first? What's the cars in this new digital area?
It's again a really good question, and the danger comes in terms of your context, right? The thing is, what we have to be careful about is universalizing our concerns and our realities to the rest of the world. So, for example, I'll give you some concrete things. Visibility, right? Me showing my face in the West is a non-event. It's boring. It's mundane. There's women just talk, they're online, they show themselves with their families. So what is mundane, here is not mundane elsewhere. Because in fact, majority of women in, parts like from South Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, when they show their face in the profile, they get a lot of pushback because they're considered a loose woman, not marriageable. Why are you out there in the public, revealing yourself, right? And so even that as an act becomes political and becomes highly problematic and can actually create physical harm. We have many cases of honor killings because women went on singing songs maybe online, things that we do not actually consider as a topic of conversation because it's not an event, right? It is just the norm. And so I think this is something which is very humbling, but also I hope optimistic for us because look, we in Europe, in the US, basically in the West, are right now in a point of deep depression. But what we are forgetting is the amazing fact that we have the freedoms that we take for granted of a working democracy, a liberal democracy, where people like myself who come from India can actually express myself in ways and reach out and discuss with people like yourself, right? When I was growing up in India, I remember I was walking down the street and I was wearing a half sleeve shirt and my whole family said, are you going to walk like this? I mean, what will our neighbors think, right? And this is the kind of mindset. When I left, I had a bad reputation in India, and it stayed for 5 years because my sister had a real issue in getting an arranged marriage. And to me, this is something that it stays with me, and I'm extraordinarily grateful to be in this kind of community and society where we have these rights which we take for granted. So I hope we will not just fight for these rights, but we will enable other countries to get these kinds of accesses which we take for granted. And the digital can be a friend in that regard, because we do need to reach out to people. We do need to have genuine dialogue and share what we have in ways which are deeply important to our well-being, mental and physical.
Thank you. Okay, I don't want to speak too loud. Thank you so much, Professor Arora. Unfortunately, but in terms of time, this is all the time we had. It would be really great to discuss more with you. But thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts and going into discussion with the audience. And we'll send you documentation on the rest of the conference. But yeah, greetings to the Netherlands.
Thank you so much,
very
everyone.
much that you were here today with us. I hope so next time here in Berlin. Thank you.
Thank you. And please feel free to reach out to me if you're on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to continue the conversations. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.